Hey there, it's Taylor Ray here with my co-host Ryan. If you have story suggestions, news tips, corrections, or comments on anything we discuss on our show, please contact us by commenting on our Facebook page, facebook.com/1pvs2p, on Twitter at 1pvs2p_podcast, or by emailing us, podcast@1pvs2p.com.
You can also record a voicemail or send us a text to 571-418-GAME. That's 571-418-4263.
Record or write in, and we might just read or play your message on our next episode. Review embargoes are up for the PlayStation VR, Ubisoft finally confirms Beyond Good and Evil 2, and Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered's campaign is playable now. Plus, we've got this week's new game releases, announcements, and more. It's Friday, October 7th, 2016, and you're listening to the 1P vs. 2P podcast. I'm Taylor Ray.
I'm Ryan Ray.
Let's start off with
First Attack.
Starting off with all the PlayStation VR review news. There were a ton of early impressions for Sony's PSVR headset, and we recapped all of them mostly on our site, 1pvs2p.com. There's a link to this blog post in the show notes. So if you want to take a look and read further or watch some of these other videos of a lot of different outlets covering everything about the PSVR. I mean, they cover all the launch titles, how it looks, how it feels. It's really something to admire. So we're going to cover sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly about the very first console VR headset. The existing ones so far have been either mobile only, like the Samsung Gear VR, and also ones that require super souped up PCs like the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive. So let's get to some of the positive, the good stuff first. What people liked about the PSVR. We actually haven't played it ourselves. We don't have the PSVR in our hands. Ryan actually did pre-order it because it was expected to be shipped next week because the worldwide release date is actually next Thursday. But we'll get into why Ryan decided to actually cancel his pre-order for the launch bundle in a bit. Let's cover what's good about it so far. So first off, we have CNET's Jeff Backlar pointing out that the PSVR is currently the most accessible and affordable full VR headset on the market, and it really doesn't have sort of the installation issues and driver problems that the Rift or the Vive do currently. So aside from the VR-ready games that are available at launch, it's also good to know that most of the games right now fall into the $20 to $40 price range, with only a few going up to $60 so far.
Yeah, I'd say that's one of the definitely one of the positive aspects of it. Installing anything on your PC, if you're a PC gamer, can be kind of a nightmare, particularly these headsets. Installing video drivers, trying to figure out why a certain game isn't running at the optimal performance, particularly with this new VR technology. It seems like a lot of people are running into trouble with the PSVR and everybody basically running off of PS4, a console experience that's basically the same across, no matter what setup you pretty much have. That's going to be basically a standardized way of getting VR. And that seems like a sure positive. The price point for a lot of these launch games is also, I think, a positive. I'm not sure about some of these $60 experiences, but I'd say most of the games that I've seen so far have fallen into that $20 sweet spot. There also happen to be, VR games tend to be pretty short. A lot of these experiences tend to veer more towards the tech demo-y style of game. So I think $20 is probably on the higher end of what I might want to pay for a PSVR game.
Yeah, because a lot of these early ones are sort of these tech demos like PlayStation Worlds. It's just like a collection of mini games. There's not much to play there. It's sort of like how Wii Sports was bundled into the Wii, right? Like, you might not play the game for hours and hours on end. They're just like mini experiences to kind of show off the tech. That's what a lot of these initial launch titles seem to be. So that's why they're priced sort of low for right now. Some of the other good things that people have noticed about it so far, Kotaku's Kirk Hamilton really admired how comfortable it felt. It seems like the headset is pretty balanced. It's a little bit heavy, but ultimately the most comfortable out of the headsets that are out there for right now. It seems to also fit well, even if you wear bulky glasses, so that's a positive. And also the fact that they have these soft rubber blinders inside for the optics really blocks out most of the outside light from around your eyes and nose, which is something people have complained about with the other headsets like the Rift and the Vive, the way some light can peek in a little bit and you experience what are called God ray effects, little light beams that really distract you when you're looking at screens that are extremely close to your face. TechCrunch also covered the PSVR. They thought that the 1080p resolution that the PSVR outputs, that is lower than what the Rift and Vive put out, but it doesn't feel that too far off from the experience he sees from the Rift and Vive. So even though it's at a lower resolution, the way these games are running, and Sony has maintained that games must run at 60 frames per second for any game that's coming out on PSVR. Ultimately, you're getting lower resolution, but it's still like another graphical advantage that Sony has over its rivals because it's overall a cheaper package.
Right. 60 frames per second, I'd say, is the bare minimum for games running at VR speed. Anything lower than that might make you sick, which is actually what we're going to get into with the bad and the ugly parts of the PSVR launch. It sounds like some of the games out there haven't been optimized quite the right way. And some of that jitteriness, some of the stuttering, may be causing some people to get a little queasy, people who are hardened VR experts at this point.
Yeah, when I read Jimmy Thang's review off of GameSpot, he actually said that that's really the biggest issue plaguing PSVR is that it's, of all the headsets, it causes the most amount of motion sickness for him. And it seems to be because most of the launch titles bind first-person movement to a joystick, whereas a lot of the early Vive and Rift games allow you to sort of teleport, and it sort of tricks your body into thinking that it's actually moving in a virtual environment. So it causes a sort of disconnect between what your eyes are seeing and what your body is feeling. So that's what gives you sort of that like nauseous feeling. And that's something that he really highlighted there. Like your body is not getting the same cues as your eye is if you're just using a controller in your hand, whether it's the DualShock 4 or the Motion Move controllers. Moving with the joystick really doesn't give your body a sense like it's walking around. So it's hard to describe if you haven't tried VR yourself. I personally have tried it a couple of times and haven't experienced this nausea yet, but I know a lot of people out there are prone to motion sickness. And a lot of the early reviews with the PSVR, including Giant Bomb's Jeff Gerstmann, really highlighted this during their all-day live stream, showing off practically all the games. He not only just talked about the motion sickness part, but I mean, the way the Move controllers are detected, the way your hands are represented, are oftentimes not read correctly, like the motion tracking coming from the PlayStation camera, both for your hands and your head, is not very smooth.
I highly recommend actually you check out Giant Bomb's 6-hour stream of the PSVR launch. You can actually see in their footage the issue that they're talking about. So basically, when you're looking in VR, you need points of reference to make sure that the world is moving at the same clip that your cone of vision is going at. And you can see the worlds going in and out in VR. You can see actually them trying to recenter the viewport, which you can actually do on PSVR if you hold down the options button in any game. And it seems like everything's kind of drifting off a little bit to the left or to the right. And that's a huge issue. That was basically the major thing that made me cancel it. I hate when games are slightly broken like that. If it ever feels like there's controls that are slightly off, if you've ever experienced like a broken controller or something where an FOV slider is slid the wrong way and it just feels like something is off and you're looking at an image, it just feels like everything's kind of pulsing at you. And in VR, that would be super, super disorienting. And Jeff Gerstmann, who's basically tested every headset out on the market, got queasy after about like 5 minutes of that Batman Arkham VR game. And that was really shocking to me. I could not believe that. I'm not somebody who gets motion sick, but That is absolutely a deal breaker for me. I anecdotally, they are demoing the PSVR in some GameStops and Best Buys. They actually have a location tracker if you check on the PlayStation blog. And anecdotally, I walked into a GameStop where one of the employees was basically setting up the demo station for the PSVR, and he was testing it out. And I watched him play for about 10 minutes, and he got queasy. He actually had to lay down on the floor, which is like an extreme reaction, right? That's something that I like absolutely. I will not have a VR headset that makes me feel like that. So, that's a huge issue that they need to take care of, either with for some firmware or. It sounds like I've been hearing some scuttlebutt that the actual problem might be with the PlayStation camera. That is actually 3-year-old tech. Even the new camera that they're bundling in with the more expensive PSVR package is basically just a remodel of the camera. They're actually not changing any of the tech inside of it. And so when you're working with 3-year-old technology, that can be a real rough one. We all remember some of the problems that the Xbox 360's Kinect had. And this seems to be aping a lot of those same issues.
And it's not just the head tracking with how the camera is looking at the LEDs that are surrounding the outside of the headset as well to figure out your positioning, where you're looking at in the game. But, let's move on to sort of what the Move controllers, the problems right there. Yeah, as I understand it, there's a problem with how the LEDs, the balls that are on top of these wand controllers in both of your hands are being read by the camera, right? They're LED lights, like it's not being tracked by lasers, which is what the Vive uses with their lighthouse stations. And the Rift only has one base station. It's sort of this constellation thing that also uses infrareds. So it's using that for motion tracking. So a lot of that stuff is very, very accurate with the Vive and the Rift. And with the PSVR, the major difference is there are no infrared lasers. It's not as accurate. So when a camera is tracking LEDs, depending on your lighting conditions, depending on how far away you're standing or sitting, away from the camera, away from your TV, it's going to affect the motion tracking and the head tracking both. And that's it seems to be what's causing all this sort of jitteriness, the stuttering that a lot of people are experiencing within games. So it's kind of really, really unfortunate. And back to the motion sickness part that we talked about briefly. Like I said before, there's already tricks that the Rift and the Vive currently use, that teleport mechanic, where you can just point your controller and beam around the environment. So Oculus has also really kind of addressed concerns that people had about feeling nauseous while playing too long. They already give these sickness ratings for each game. It's not perhaps like the best solution to address nausea here, but Sony is just doing none of this. It doesn't, like, these early games don't have this teleport mechanic that the Vive has, and it doesn't have sickness ratings for each game. And instead, Sony is only recommending that you just take 30-second breaks every 10 minutes. It's just really not an ideal solution to really address the nausea that a lot of people are probably going to have with this thing.
Right. And, it seems like the early adopters, the hardcore audience that you're really going after with this VR conversation, is not going to accept that every 10 minutes you need to stop 30 seconds. Like, that's also a deal breaker. Like, I know a lot of these experiences are very shallow. They're very like minigame like. Batman Arkham VR, again, is basically a 90-minute experience. But if you have to break up every half-hour play session every 10-minute play session with 30 seconds, like, that sucks. That's basically real life loading times. Like, make the tech better so that you're not making your customers very sick. I expect that if they don't fix these issues, there's either going to be a massive recall or Sony's going to have a lawsuit on its hands.
Let's get back to the price of this package. So a lot of people are saying, well, this is the cheapest, most affordable entry-level way to get into VR. It's being sold for $400, which just includes the headset, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Ryan?
Right. You can actually just get the headset for $400. And then the more expensive package, it's all-inclusive, is $500. That includes a copy of PlayStation Worlds, the headset, 2 Move controllers, and the PlayStation camera. I actually think that's a pretty good deal for everything that will probably need to play every single game that's coming out on this platform. But The $400 headset is only package is kind of a misnomer, because for a lot of the games you may need the Move, and definitely the camera is not an optional thing. To use the PSVR, you need the PlayStation camera. You can of course buy the thing separately, but I don't know why people wouldn't just buy the whole package all in one slot.
Well, for right now, you really don't have much of an option, because that $500 bundle that includes everything, the headset, the Move controllers, PlayStation Worlds, and the camera, which is, that's currently sold out everywhere on all major online retailers. You can't find it. I think they are selling bundles limitedly at brick and mortar stores like Best Buy. They have a limited supply for people showing up in person, but for right now, you just cannot pre-order this, period. So if you really want to buy this thing on day one, and your only option is to buy the $400 headset only, then you're looking at buying the camera separately for $60, and then the Move controllers a piece cost about $20 to $30. So, it's sort of misleading to say, well, all of this is really, really affordable, because when you add the cost of not only this hardware, but also the PS4 as well, you're looking at a total package of anywhere between $800 and $1,000, depending on whether or not you're buying the PS4 Slim or the PS4 Pro.
I think for me, the hard part is that, I agree that of the VR options out there, it's definitely the most affordable, definitely the most accessible. But if it doesn't work, that's money flushed down the tubes, right? We know that VR headsets generally, any early console experience tends to have a lot of the problems of early adopters, right? The games are really shallow, the launch lineup isn't great, the tech may not be there. The problem with VR, PSVR specifically, is that we kind of have already a baseline to judge what a good VR headset is, right? We had the Rift that came out earlier, and the HTC Vive that also came out earlier. And for the most part, they've ironed out a lot of the early issues with that at this point. And actually, we're already starting to think about revisions for those two headsets, and Sony is coming out. Sony seemingly knows how to build products, builds TVs, builds good consoles, genuinely speaking. And now we have this headset that offers a very cheap way to get into VR, but seemingly a way that's going to make people sick and potentially doesn't work on some games. I'm not convinced that this is going to really sell people on the concept. That's ultimately why I canceled my pre-order. I can't pay $500 for something that is just straight up broken.
It may not be broken for right now. It just seems very imperfect. And for that amount of money, I think you're right. I think it is a good idea to wait. I didn't pre-order it at all, and I'm really, really glad that I looked around, see what, these early impressions are pre-launch. It's really the best policy. Don't pre-order anything until it gets released and reviewed. It's the best way to save your money, to find things that you're going to value, that you're going to enjoy. And, I think they'll get there if they have firmware updates that improve the motion tracking and the head tracking for the headset. Then maybe I'll reconsider it. If they do an improved camera, for example, then yeah, it's probably the easiest way to get into VR on an entry level. Because let's face it, something like, if you're looking at stuff off mobile phones, off Google Cardboard or Samsung Gear VR, there just aren't a lot of great games available, period. So, you're looking at a really cheap solution there, but for what? So, I don't know. And the last thing we should cover about this, part of the bad and the ugly, is that there is a separate processor box that you do have to connect to your PS4 in order to keep the headset connected at all times. It's what's driving most of the graphics and processing everything in VR for the headset itself. But here's the thing, it's a little unwieldy because you have to connect an extra HDMI cable from the PS4 to this box, and then another HDMI cable from the box from the TV to the box. And on top of that, it occupies one USB port as well. And on consoles right now, I don't know if you're aware, but the PS4 only has 2 USB ports. So let's say you're using another accessory like a wireless headset. Sony has that gold and silver headsets, right, that you require a USB dongle. You have to constantly be plugging and unplugging things. If you want to charge your controller, you can't always keep everything connected all at once. It's really a shame that the PS4 just doesn't have more USB ports for something like this. Like, it's kind of annoying and unruly to deal with all this cable management, this extra piece of hardware that lives next to your console. Not everything is driven on board from just the PS4 itself.
Right. The back of my TV already looks like a mess of cables, and I'm not looking to add about 3 more cables with the PSVR. That's not good. And most people, I think, are not going to want to deal with that. So I think that the breakout box is a neat idea, but the execution of it just super, super poor. I think the other thing too is that the PSVR does have some good launch titles, promising launch titles. I think Batman Arkham VR looks very interesting. I think Thumper looks super cool. I think Res Infinite also standout game from this launch. But the thing about all of those games is that they're only console exclusive for a brief amount of time. Arkham VR is probably the longest at about a year until we see a PC version. But Res Infinite, you can play that without the headset. The Thumper, also the same thing. Thumper is also coming out to PC. Like, if you want to have these experiences on your PS4, like, I totally understand that. I have an underpowered PC myself. This is a very appealing package, but if it doesn't work, and I could probably save up my money to have a better experience with the Vive, with the Rift, on a powered up PC, that by the time I save enough money, the technology will probably get there. Like, why not just wait and do that? Like, I don't know why you would invest in this really early, promising, but ultimately flawed headset just to get into their system. Like, it just seems like a bad investment.
And there's also, I should mention, an additional power brick too. So another thing to consider if you're connecting this to your home theater setup or to your TV, wherever, that's an extra thing that you need to keep powered. So make sure you have enough power outlets available through a power strip, what have you. Because it's just more hardware you need to connect and keep connected if you want to always be playing PSVR. Early thoughts about this is that, it's imperfect. It's probably the most affordable, easiest way to get into VR. But the consensus here, the verdict is that the motion and head tracking is just not perfect, and it's causing a lot of nausea unnecessarily. So perhaps wait out. Don't be one of the early adopters. That's what we're recommending for the PlayStation VR. Speaking of VR, this is a very heavy VR episode because we're going to get into what Google announced, a new headset. It's called the Daydream View VR. This is very different from the Google Cardboard, right? Because this is actually a piece of plastic, and it's available for $79. This thing is covered in microfiber cloth. It really resembles the Samsung Gear VR, if you know what that looks like, best way to describe it. But it's 30% lighter than similar devices. So if you didn't like how a Gear fit on your face, it's a lot lighter that they're promising. The Gear VR, also, I should mention, there's a difference in price here because that costs $100 and this Daydream View costs $80. $79.99, but $80, right? The thing also about this is that it's really not device specific. So there are many phones that are compatible with this thing, but most notably Google's new phones, which I believe it's called the Pixel, I want to say off the top of my head. I don't have it here in the notes. But anyway, it supports more than just like Samsung phones do with the Gear. Just like the Gear, you can connect wirelessly to any compatible phone. You open the latch, you drop your phone in, close the latch, and then run a VR-ready app, and you're good to go. It's the first VR headset to run on Google's Android-based platform, so it's called Daydream, right? There aren't many details so far about games on it, but the only one so far that we know about is CCP Games' Gunjack 2. Ryan, did you ever check out this game on any other VR headset?
I did not, but CCP Games, they're the developers behind Eve and Eve Valkyrie. Eve Valkyrie, of course, the game that was kind of a launch title that was included with the Oculus Rift at first and is now on other platforms. It seems like CCP Games is doing a good job at getting their foot in the door with a bunch of these launch headsets. And my take on mobile VR is that it's a really neat idea. Like, everybody has a phone, right? I have a Gear VR, actually, and I think to showcase VR actually to give people an idea who aren't familiar with the space about what it is and why it's so important. It's actually like a cool, neat idea. The problem with the Gear VR right now, as it stands, though, is that like mine is collecting dust. There aren't a lot of like good immersive titles. For the most part, what you're experiencing is a lot of like 3D movies. If you're big into porn, there's like a whole new genre of VR porn out there for you. But as far as games are concerned, like there hasn't been anything like super compelling. So far, the most compelling thing is something that it is coming. There's the VR version of Minecraft available for the Gear VR. It is available now, but Microsoft announced earlier that they were going to you can start pairing the Xbox One S controller with the Gear VR version of Minecraft, and that seems like a really good entry-level way to get Minecraft into the hands of a lot more people, and that's something I'd actually be interested in doing. But my Gear VR is just sitting there, and I think Google Daydream needs to announce more games, announce more experiences, for this to really take off. I think mobile VR is smart. It certainly seems way cheaper than the PSVR, and I would actually classify mobile VR as the bigger entry point for a lot of people. It's certainly way more affordable.
But just no killer apps yet so far. So again, can't recommend it, even though it's much more affordable. You're talking about the total cost of a smartphone, which can differ greatly, but you're talking about $80 to $100 versus $500 to $1,000 and upwards with the higher end stuff, with the Rift and the Vive, which also require a really expensive, great PC. Now that whole package, now you're talking in the $2,000 range. So yes, much more affordable, but still maybe not worth it because there aren't really great games to play. And finally, more VR news. Let's talk about the Oculus Touch. These are controllers that have been promised for a while now. Now finally confirmed. These things are going to cost $200. They will ship December 6th. So it's been a while since the original Rift release back in April. Pre-orders for the Touch controllers start on October 10th.
Right. Early previews have said that these controllers could be the best controllers available for VR. They let you interact with the virtual world much in the same way that the Vive and the PSVR controllers do. But they also recognize additional hand gestures. If you watch the Oculus Connect 3 live stream, Mark Zuckerberg kind of demoed some of this with the social app. And the controllers are going to launch with some other additional gestures and features. Also announced with this were new earbuds that you can use instead of the kind of crappy over-the-ear headphones that came bundled with the Rift. These earbuds are going to cost just about $49 and promise to deliver sound as good as those other headphones did. Again, these are also coming out the same time as the Touch controllers. The disappointing news with this, of course, is that the Rift is getting a slight upgrade. They're attaching room scale sensors, which the Vive already had, to the Oculus Rift. They're available actually for $79 a piece. And in order to get the full room scale effect, which with the Vive is actually included in the total package, you're going to need 3 of these Oculus sensors. So if you do all the math for all of that, that means that the Oculus package is going to cost slightly more than the Vive. And until we know what exactly how that package is going to perform, it seems like it might be a little harder to recommend. The total math, including the headset, the touch controllers, and the 3 sensors, is going to add up to be about $960. They did announce with this also that there's actually a better minimum spec out there for the Oculus Rift. It's going to be slightly easier to achieve this. If you remember, the Rift ready computers were originally announced like you can get there with a PC that's going to cost you about $1,000, and the specs that they showed here new VR ready PCs are going to only start at $500. So they're trying to make this more affordable. They're trying to make this work on crappier hardware, but I'm not sure that the value proposition is quite there yet.
Some of the specs include the graphics cards. Minimum, you need a NVIDIA 960 or greater. As far as the processor goes, a little bit smaller, which is better, much more affordable option. You only need a minimum an Intel i3 or equivalent processor. Also, just 8 gigs of RAM, one compatible HDMI video output, one USB 3.0, only 2 USB 2.0 ports, and then, of course, Windows 8 or newer. So a little dialed down, but yeah, it seems a little bit easier pill to swallow when it comes to the Rift in total. One other thing I do want to mention is the way the Oculus Touch controllers look. If I could describe them, it sort of looks like a Move controller, if you're familiar with what those look like, except without the ball on top. But instead of the ball, there's a perpendicular, almost like a complete halo, like a circle. And ultimately, there is also some face buttons. There's also a joystick on both hands as well. And there's a lot of motion tracking, obviously, involved here. But perhaps, I don't know, to me, they seem like the bulkiest of all the controllers for VR out there. That's my impression so far. But they seem to be the most responsive based on these early reviews. Again, Ryan and I, we actually don't own the Vive. We don't own the Rift. We don't own the PSVR. So we haven't tried these new touch controllers ourselves. But based on these early reviews, it seems like they are the most accurate when it comes to motion controls.
Yeah, I just don't think there's a killer VR app. You know, I think the technology is there, but all our game ideas for these games are basically shooting galleries or mini game level of immersion. And I think that's eventually what sunk the Wii. A lot of the late title Wii games were a lot of like mini game collections and really like crap fests, and a lot of the VR games out there their ideas really haven't advanced further past like games like Time Crisis or House of the Dead. Great games of their time, but they're light gun games. A lot of the VR experiences you can have now are basically that.
All right, let's move away from VR. Let's actually go back to a story that we covered on an earlier episode, which was about Digital Homicide. This was a company, a developer responsible for a lot of shovelware out on Steam, and they got a lot of backlash after they decided to sue a lot of anonymous Steam players who decided to review their games negatively through Steam Greenlight and through some games that were available to purchase on Steam directly. So they decided, Digital Homicide, to drop their $18 million lawsuit, saying their company's basically been destroyed. The quote I have here from James Romine says, "It's been stomped into the ground from 1,000 directions and use is discontinued. I'm going back into the workforce and watching what's really going on." End quote. Yeah, yikes. I don't know. I think for a lot of people, this seems like just desserts.
Right, absolutely. And Kotaku's Nathan Grayson, I thought, had a very excellent comment on this. He said it's, quote, hard to feel bad for Digital Homicide, given that they often lashed out at Steam users and flooded the platform with shoddy games, likely as a means of abusing the trading card system to rake in money. I just, like we said a few weeks ago when we covered this topic, like we should be rooting for Valve and for the suit to get dismissed. And lo and behold, that's what happened. This developer was looking to abuse the platform, definitely looking to sue its users, which is not a good look. And when you go very aggro on that, you're not going to win over a lot of fans in the court of public opinion. And in this case, you're not even going to get taken to court. They're just dismiss the charges right there and then, because the legal fees for going up against Valve are astonishing. And particularly when they went over, 100 Steam users, we're talking about like a class action lawsuit here. Like that gets expensive pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it was even Digital Homicide that proposed the motion to dismiss. So, they decided ultimately, we can't go through with this lawsuit. Our business is destroyed. We've run out of money. So ultimately, they wanted the dismissal. So, I guess karma comes around here. It's really hard to feel bad for them. I agree with Nathan Grayson from Kotaku about the story. I mean, glad it's over. Glad we're at peace with this. Now I think Valve should go back to policing a lot of the junk that's being put out on their store, a lot of the shovelware that's being approved through Greenlight in a lot of really sort of weird, nefarious ways. Let's move on to our new game releases for next week.
I love new releases.
Mafia 3 for PS4, PC, and Xbox One. I don't know too much about the series, to be honest with you. Ryan, you've played Mafia 2 a lot, right?
I've played it a little bit. Basically, it's an open world gangster game, kind of set not in modern times, kind of like in the 1920s. This game is a little more modern than that, but not too much more modern. The protagonist in this game is an African American, and he's also a veteran of the Vietnam War. This game takes place in New Orleans. This game is actually out today, and unfortunately, the game's publisher 2K has not sent early copies out to reviewers, which is really puzzling. Typically, that sends a signal that they don't have a lot of confidence in the product. However, there have been other games like this year that have not been sent out early and actually have been pretty good. Doom, for example, was not sent out early to reviewers, and everybody was worried that was going to be bad. And it turns out that that game is probably one of the better games out this year. So we're still waiting to hear on what the word is on Mafia 3, but it has a super interesting premise, and we don't see a lot of African-American protagonists, particularly in open world games. I think the last one was GTA 5, Franklin, and he was one of the three main protagonists in that game, but really kind of a side character, didn't get really a lot of screen time, which is kind of a shame. And I think Mafia 3 has so much potential. You know, the Mafia games are really playing off of this like really neat idea of like going up against the mob. The Godfather, Scarface, these are really popular movies, and I don't see why a game modeled after those kinds of things can't be popular too.
Well, with a new twist here, because now we're talking about the 60s and 70s in New Orleans, like in the swamp, in the bayou, really interesting environment versus like a New York or a Chicago, like a lot of these other gangster games take place in. So very neat premise so far. We'll wait for the reviews, maybe talk about it on next week's episode. Next, we have Paper Mario Color Splash for the Wii U. This is a follow-up to the kind of disappointing Paper Mario Sticker Star. I played that on 3DS. This one, though, Color Splash, is on Wii U. It's an action-adventure game with Paper Mario in that series. Very light RPG mechanics. You do have like turn-based battles, but the battle mechanics are a little bit different this time. You're working with cards that you're dealing that apply certain effects in battle. Reviewers for now are saying that the game is really funny. It has genuinely good writing, makes a lot of good Mario references and callbacks, but the battle system is just very similar to the Sticker Star battle system, which is to say very lackluster and boring and repetitive. So that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, I think Nintendo really dropped the ball on this one. The Paper Mario, the original on N64, and the GameCube follow-up, The Thousand Year Door, was, I think, what a lot of people were expecting to spiritual successors to Super Mario RPG. And ever since then, the Paper Mario games after those two games have been super disappointing. Super Paper Mario was kind of an action-adventure game on the Wii that really didn't deliver. Sticker Star was even worse because, like you said, the battle system had worked on these stickers that were very the one-time use. You didn't have a basic attack, and the boss battles really boiled down to if you didn't have this one certain sticker that was the boss's weak point, you were basically screwed. You got to pour one out for the Wii U because this is basically the last major Wii U title announced so far. There's supposedly a version of Zelda Breath of the Wild coming to the Wii U, but I wouldn't count on that. This is basically the last big title, and it looks really colorful. It looks really funny, but I just can't get excited for this game. I think if you're looking for the Paper Mario experience, something that has kind of that like humor and also a good battle system, look more towards the Mario and Luigi series. There was a game that actually combined Mario and Luigi and Paper Mario earlier this year on the 3DS, Mario and Luigi Paper Jam. That was actually a quite excellent game that kind of combined both genres, but man, Paper Mario has really been in a downward spiral, and I don't think Color Splash is going to be the game that turns it around.
Well, I would argue not even Thousand Year Door, like you said on the GameCube, but Paper Mario 1 and 2 originally on the N64 were the only worthwhile ones in the series. I mean, if they could have just gone back to that sort of more traditional JRPG format, and even going, they drew a lot of inspiration from Super Mario RPG on the Super Nintendo. If they stopped with these silly gimmicks like Sticker Star and this thing in Color Splash, this card system, these one-time use actions that are just very awkward and it makes for a lot of the same repetitive, boring random battles. I think it would fare a lot better. Just look to what you did in Paper Mario 1 and 2, and then that's it. You can sell a really, really great sequel, but instead they keep trying to introduce more innovation here, but it's innovation that's extremely, extremely gimmicky to me. So, I don't know, kind of a bummer. Let's go back to PSVR. I promise this will be the last of it for this episode. 100-Foot Robot Golf out for the PS4 and the PSVR. It's a golfing game with anime robot mechs as the golfers, making golf courses out of giant cities with skyscrapers.
Right. This game has destructible environments, of course, as you might expect with giant anime mechs, and also features the McElroy brothers. If you haven't heard of them, they are popular podcasters. Two of them are actually video game journalists themselves for Polygon. They're the game's announcers, and they're super funny. They have their own podcast, My Brother and Me. That's really cool that they're serving as the game's announcers. Typically, golf games have very boring, very droll announcers, a lot like real golf on TV.
Yep.
And this game just looks ridiculous, super fun. Again, playable on PS4 standardly, or if you happen to have the VR headset, there's also a PSVR mode for this game. I'm excited to be excited about a golf game again. Mario Golf on the N64 was probably the last time I was super into a golf game. And this seems to be in that same mode of like off the color wackiness and not a traditional sports game.
Yeah, the trailers are hilarious. It was a huge surprise at the last PlayStation experience and teased a little bit more at E3. I love that the McElroy brothers are the in-game announcers. They're a hilarious group, the three of them. I highly recommend that podcast you mentioned, My Brother and Me. Very, very, very funny. I'd love to see their commentary in-game. I can't wait to check this one out. Even though I don't have a PSVR, I'm glad that it's also available on the PS4 just by itself. Moving on to Gears of War 4 for Xbox One and PC. This is part of the Xbox Play Anywhere program. It's the latest one since Gears of War Judgment, which, believe it or not, came out, I want to say, what was it, 2011 or 12? It's been a while.
Yeah, and there was also Gears of War Ultimate Edition, which we said was a big disappointment last year. But this is basically from a new reformed developer from the old Gears devs. The Coalition is what these developers are called. And they're returning to the Gears storyline 20 years later. You're not playing as Marcus Phoenix and Dom. You're playing as Marcus Phoenix's son, JD, and a whole new cast of COG soldiers. And reviewers are saying that this game is surprisingly good with the new set of characters. And though it features a pretty typical storyline, the gameplay is still a lot of fun, which is exactly what I wanted to hear. The Gears gameplay is so good. That game was very innovative as far as third-person shooters were concerned, third-person cover-based shooters, introduced kind of a lot of the like horde mode type of game modes that we see these days. Interestingly, the multiplayer is running at 60 frames a second, while the single-player campaign is locked at 30, and there seems to be actual improvements to that aforementioned horde mode. They also seem to be promoting a new mode called Escalation, which is their like take on esports. That's going to be a 13-round ordeal, which is a pretty long for a multiplayer match. And also Arms Race, Gears' answer to Call of Duty's gun game, which, if you're not familiar, basically you start off with kind of a weak gun, and then as you kill more enemies, you build up to more powerful weapons. And in Gears of War 4, you can also now run private matches, which you have not been able to do in previous Gear titles. The Gears games, the multiplayer is basically what people kind of stick around with that game for. The single-player campaigns, of course, very memorable. But the Gears of War multiplayer in the past has always been very laggy and hasn't run super great. So to hear that running very well, 60 frames a second on the PC and Xbox One, and they're actually separating out the platform. So if you're a PC player, you're not going to be able to play with Xbox One players because they want to keep that like keyboard and mouse advantage separate from people who are just using controllers. However, if you buy one copy of the game because of the Play Anywhere program, you'll have it in both places. So I'm super interested in this game. I love the Gears franchise besides the missteps with Judgment and Ultimate Edition, and looking forward to checking this one out.
And finally, for next week, it's Dragon Quest Builders for PS4 and Vita. This is kind of like a mashup between Minecraft and Dragon Quest. So it's like a world-building game resource gathering, but with Dragon Quest style. So builders, it's like really goal oriented, but also open world, so you can drop blocks wherever you want, but it has that JRPG flavor that Dragon Quest is really, really known for. The early previews have said that the game's tutorial is very, very informative, but very, very short. And though the game is rich in sort of that nostalgia around Dragon Quest, it's not the hardcore, really difficult JRPG you would expect. I mean, killing enemies in battle in game gives you loot, but no experience here.
Right, and I'm glad that they're taking a stab at this. A lot of people have tried to come after the Minecraft throne. Yeah, the game looks super beautiful and has a lot of the aesthetic of Dragon Quest that people are going after. Really cool game.
We're going to go through our new video game announcements pretty quickly here.
Here comes a new challenger!
I remember those Cruisin' games, the Cruisin' USA back in the arcade. It's back with Cruisin' Blast. So Raw Thrills, this is a developer in conjunction with Nintendo, who owns the rights to the Cruisin' series now that Midway is just, it's gone. That developer's been gone for a while now. So the original creator of the franchise, this guy's name is Eugene Jarvis, is back as the head of Raw Thrills. Very, very exciting to hear, because this follow-up Cruisin' Blast is exclusive to arcades for now. And the machine itself, the cabinet, has a 43-inch 1080p screen running off a 750 graphics card. So really, really good visuals here with up to 8-player multiplayer. So I would love to see a console port of this, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. The Cruisin' series eventually came to consoles on the N64. Really great games, arcade-style racers from back in the day, and I would love to see this come back for consoles. It's about time for Cruisin' to come back.
Of course, in the arcades, you can play with the racing wheel and the pedals themselves. They're just amazing staples for a lot of arcades out there. I'm just so glad that Cruisin' is back. Next, we have another game that's making a triumphant return, Voodoo Vince. Remember that from the original Xbox? That came out originally in 2003. It's getting an HD remaster for Xbox One and Windows next year.
Yeah, this seemed to come out of basically nowhere, and Voodoo Vince is one of those games that I think people really skipped out. It's probably in the same category as also Rand's like Blinks the Time Sweeper back in the day. This was Microsoft trying to throw animal like console mascots at the Xbox, and just wasn't the right time for that audience. So maybe this is the time now for Voodoo Vince. He's a voodoo doll who basically jump around and try to solve environmental puzzles and stuff. So looking forward to what that remaster looks like.
Yeah, if you never checked out Voodoo Vince, it's like this third-person action platformer, very typical of the era. So if you played it back then, check out this HD remaster coming out next year. And yet another very big surprise here. Beyond Good and Evil 2 is in development. Ubisoft finally confirms this after years of speculation that the original Beyond Good and Evil was getting a sequel. It's finally in pre-production. There's a series of teases by lead designer Michel Ancel, confirming on their Facebook page that Ubisoft Montpellier is at work with Ansel, who originally worked on Beyond Good and Evil 1 on this project as well. No details about the release date or which platforms it's coming to, but yes, this is like the definition of cult classic.
Right, and the concept art that Ansel originally teased this announcement with on Instagram is really impressive. The last Beyond Good and Evil thing was a remaster on the 360. Beyond Good and Evil is, I think, it's one of those like very niche games that basically try to copy the like Zelda template, particularly Zelda the Wind Waker template. Basically, you sail around, you take lots of pictures, you try to save this world, uncover like a government conspiracy, and I think a lot of people overlooked it. You know, I would say if you're interested in that kind of like Zelda game, but you're kind of tired of Zelda itself, maybe look at Beyond Good and Evil, the original, and maybe look forward to the sequel. Maybe they'll do something more with it. There are a lot of like anthropomorphized animals in this universe, and also it has a very like cool art style. So hopefully this game comes out. Hopefully it's not another Duke Nukem Forever situation. We've been waiting for news on a Beyond Good and Evil 2 for a long time, and hopefully it sees the light of day at some point.
Okay, let's move on to what we're playing this week. Both of us have been playing Forza Horizon 3 lately. We'll talk about our single-player experiences, but also the co-op campaign. I have to say, I'm absolutely in love with Forza Horizon 3. I just really love the lush environments, driving around Australia. You're driving around the outback, like urban landscapes, beaches. You can drive on the water through jungles. Just the scenery is spectacular. But wrapped around all of that, there's just a ton of cars, a ton of customizations, decals. You can really fine tune how you drive. I was surprised to see all the available options. You can select everything from a driving guiding line, which tells you when you should brake, which part of the track you should steer to, so very helpful for beginners. You can actually disable that to earn yourself some more credits in races. And also you can, enable or disable things like, advanced braking systems, ABS, to give yourself a little bit more of a challenge in driving. So it's just one of these perfect blends, I think, of an arcade with a simulation style racing game. I'm having a ton of fun with it. I hadn't played any Forza game up until this point. Even Forza Horizon 1 or 2, I hadn't played those. I'm just really, really loving what I'm seeing here at Forza Horizon 3. What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Horizon series. I think they're the kind of like right entry point for people who are maybe interested in these like racing games, maybe these like kind of car porn type games. The graphics look really beautiful, even on my really shoddy PC machine. I get this warning that there's actually my card runs on the very lowest specs, but that really only affects the game's photo mode. The game runs beautifully. And I'm not sure what the initial reports are about poor optimization, but the game runs great on my end. And I have a pro tip out there if you're interested in having a lot of fun immediately with this game. So in this game, you're playing as kind of the boss of the Horizon Festival. And as you play more and more races and unlock more and more fans, you unlock more racing sites to expand the festival. And you get an option, actually, every time you level up this capability. And I recommend that most people unlock the Outback section first, because when you go there and unlock that section first, you actually get a free car. You get your choice of a dune buggy, because, of course, this being Australia, of course, there's going to be dune buggies. And the dune buggy cars are a lot of fun to play as, and a lot of those races out in the outback are kind of these off-road races where there's a lot of jumping, a lot of catching air, a lot more of the less of the like street racing that you might experience in other kind of racing games, and a lot of just more like go for it kinds of gameplay. So that's a lot of fun. This game also has what I would classify as kind of like Skate 3 levels of challenges. They're called the Horizon Bucket List. And basically these are challenges that make you do drifts in a set amount of time, or get from point A to point B in a set amount of time, or destroy a certain amount of objects using your car. And they're really, really fun takes on the universe. They really kind of like expand your skills and really challenge you. And you can also, they have the ability of setting up your own challenges at some of the points. You've actually unlocked the ability, it's called the blueprint, and you can actually set up your own races, you can set up your own challenges, and it's just a lot of pure fun. Taylor and I tried actually the co-op campaign, so this game also features an option where you can play the single-player campaign co-op. Progress unlocks between both players. The host player is actually the one determining which races to actually start, but the progress carries over with both. Not very intuitive, I would say. It was kind of hard to get that set up, particularly on the PC. That uses the Xbox Party system, and I couldn't actually get my headset to work with that. I think a few kinks to work out with that, but once we did get it up and running, it was pretty seamless. I could see Taylor racing alongside me, not doing as well in some of the races, but...
Yeah, definitely not. And I was playing on my Xbox One, and it ran very well. Like, I was very surprised to see the syncing. Like, I was seeing Ryan driving it real time in this massive open world. We're driving to different race events, and he's selecting which ones we're going to be playing. And it was just very, very impressive the way Forza Horizon 3 handles the car states. Like, I can see Ryan playing on a PC, playing in real time next to me while I'm playing on the Xbox One. And you might say to yourself, well, yeah, that's just online multiplayer. But the fact that they're bridging the two services was really, really impressive to me, because of how demanding, how graphics wise, how demanding that was. Like, it's just one of these games where there's a ton going on screen. There's just a huge world to build. There's huge draw distances in the environment. And I was very, very, very impressed at the frame rate and the speed in which it ran. But yeah, I have to say, just overall, though, I think we can both agree that it's just one of these racing games we strongly, strongly recommend. We actually took advantage of a pricing mistake by Target, which is awesome. What was it, 20 or $25? I can't remember.
It was $20, yeah, and the game is supposed to be out for 60, and Target made a mistake, and I think a lot of people jumped on it, including ourselves, so we lucked out. Maybe there'll be a sale at some point, maybe on Black Friday, but definitely look for Forza Horizon 3 on a lot of people's top 10 lists. It's just a fantastic game, and I don't know how they're going to really top it. I don't know how any car game is really going to top it. We haven't seen a car game this good basically since Burnout Paradise.
And the cherry on top is this is another one of those games as part of the Play Anywhere program. So if you buy one version, you own it on both platforms, on Xbox One and PC for Windows 10. So very cool. Ryan, tell me about Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered. You've pre-ordered the next Call of Duty, Infinite Warfare, and this came as a pre-order bonus. But so far, though, the multiplayer is not unlocked. It's only the campaign available right now, right?
Right. So for people who purchased the Legacy Edition or the Legacy Pro Edition, these are the editions of the game that come with Modern Warfare Remastered, which Activision has said that they will not sell this separately. We'll see how they hold out on that. But yeah, if you pre-order copies of these games, you're going to get to play the single-player campaign 30 days early. And so far, that's been pretty cool. It serves to remind me how great the original Modern Warfare was. It's a little disappointing that they aren't releasing the multiplayer a little bit early, but that campaign, if you remember, really set the stage for a lot of single-player shooter campaigns moving forward. It featured like Soap and Captain Price. They had that like memorable level all gillied up where you kind of like sneak around as snipers. The remaster, like is one of the better remasters I've seen in a long time. The models actually that they used for the characters are much better this time around. They seem to be going for smoother textures. It looks a lot better than it did on the 360 when it originally came out. It's a good remaster to a really great classic game. And I'm having a lot of fun playing it. They also have, of course, added trophies and achievements. So if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and do that. And it's really cool. If you are looking forward to this year's Call of Duty, which it doesn't sound like a lot of people are, the remaster, at least, of Modern Warfare is something promising to look forward to. I really hope Activision sells this separately because I'm not sure that where they're going with this, bundling it only with pre-orders of the more expensive edition of their Infinite Warfare is really going to do them a lot of favors.
There are rumors that you cannot play Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered without the disc for Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, which is a huge bummer for a lot of people. And I guess they're doing this, Activision is doing this in order to prevent used game sales. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, oh, I'm just going to pre-order this game, get my Modern Warfare Remastered, and then just trade in Infinite Warfare because I'm not interested in that. This is, I guess, a strategy to combat that. And if that's the case, that's really kind of unfortunate. They really should sell these games as two separate products because I think there's an audience for both. I think there's a lot of money to be made. I think there's a lot of people who really prefer Modern Warfare over these more recent futuristic style ones like the last one, or excuse me, the second to last one, which was Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. And the most recent one as of right now is Black Ops 3, correct? Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while. I've played every single Call of Duty. It's hard to keep track of which ones come out in what order. But this one stands alone as one of the best of all time in the series. I mean, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare just really revolutionized multiplayer shooting, period. And that's the least to say because the campaign itself was story-driven, had incredible set pieces. I'm glad to see it's back. Very anxious to check it out myself, and very much looking forward to Infinite Warfare as well. I do want to check this game when it comes out in the next several weeks, so stay tuned for our impressions on that game as well, because we both have it pre-ordered. All right, let's wrap this thing up. This has been a long episode. Ryan, you ready for the bonus stage?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yusuke Naoda, he is the art director at Square Enix who worked on The Bouncer, the core Final Fantasy games, served as the art director for FF7, 8, 10, and 15. He's a legend, but after 24 years with Square Enix, he's left the company. Don't worry, though. It was amicable. He's doing it with family in mind. He will continue to illustrate and work part-time for Square Enix, though nothing has been announced yet, while working on some much-deserved rest.
Finally, a Japanese developer who's having a friendly separation with his company. How refreshing. Inside's evocative soundtrack was recorded using a human skull. The sound designer and composer for the game, Martin Stig Anderson, said, quote, "Early on, as we were working on Inside, I had the idea of working with a human skull because I think it's very interesting how the sound of your own voice sounds very different in your own head. That was the curious thought that led me to acquire a human skull and experiment with it. I can't blame him because we podcast and we have to hear the sounds of our own voices."
This is so creepy if you look at the photos of this thing. He's got this old skull and a separate jaw that's hooked up with all these wires and electrical currents that are producing these sounds, but very unique, very innovative. So there's this Grand Theft Auto 5 mod spoofing all those exploding Samsung Galaxy Note 7s. Samsung has a massive problems with exploding batteries, threatening pockets everywhere. There's a modder who brought those real-world explosives into the game, turning the phone itself into a throwable explosive.
This seems like the kind of thing that GTA 5 perfectly satirizes. Just make the phone into a grenade. Perfect.
Art imitates life. Life imitates art. That's it. Remember to listen and subscribe to our show, the 1P versus 2P podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, including iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn, Clamor, or just bookmark our site, 1pvs2p.com, where you can read our gaming blog too.
Our sources for this week's stories have been posted at the link in the show notes. Highly recommend you check them out. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Twitter. We're very active there at 1pvs2p_podcast.
As always, thank you to Phonetic Hero for letting us play his music for our show, Coffee Stomp and Super Manly Brothers X. Both of those songs are part of the compilation project, Chip Tunes Equals Win. I'm Taylor Ray. That's my co-host, Ryan Ray. Thanks for listening. See you next week.
Okay, this is going real bad over here. Are you seeing that?
What?
The whole world moving bad?
Oh, you're standing still right now?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's not good.
Are you close to a boundary?
Oh.
Oh.